Hello, everybody. It is the end of March, March 31st, and welcome to another episode of the Reach Films podcast. I am your host, Jeff Fagan, and today we have a lot to discuss. So, this week alone, there's been the release of the Sony ZV-E1, which is Sony's now most affordable full-frame 10-bit shooting camera. That's essentially an A7S III. We'll get into it. We're also going to talk about the first week I've had with the Canon R50 and why it is not only an amazing camera, but at the same time disappointed me in a few areas that haven't really been covered much. So we'll discuss that today as well. And then also, we have hit 5,000 on the Reach Films channel, 5,000 subscribers. So I do want to thank all of you for joining me on this journey. It's been crazy. I didn't really intend on doing this whole YouTube journey, and one thing went to another, and 3 years later, or over 3 years later, I'm still doing it. So I do want to thank you for coming on that journey with me. So let's go into the chat. We have Anson. Hell yeah, congrats, dude. Thank you for joining us, Anson. If you haven't seen his channel, definitely check it out. He's got some sick content. Hero Shots, congrats, dude. Hero, thank you, bro. Thank you for coming on today. It's been a great journey so far. And the thing I love about YouTube, before we get into today's topic, is the fact that YouTube has been a really great place, not necessarily just to, make videos for YouTube, but it's also been a great place to experiment and do things that I didn't necessarily want to do on client work. Experiment with gear, whether that's cameras, lenses, audio equipment, lighting. I've been able to just do all these experiments and really enjoy myself and be able to do that. So it's been very fun, that aspect of YouTube. And then also getting to meet all of you. Being able to connect with so many of you, especially so many videographers, content creators in the Florida area in general. It's been pretty cool. So, sorry, I got to turn my phone on to silent there. So let's get started on the main topics of today, shall we? I was going to have a co-host today, but my buddy Mark was going to come on, and he ended up not being able to make it, so I decided to do this a little earlier than planned. Let's talk about the ZV-E1. I'm sure you've all heard about it. It's a 4K 60 10-bit full-frame camera. Call it 4K 60 because as of right now, that's what it is limited to. There's going to be a 4K 120 update, which I guess is going to have 10-bit as well, but there hasn't been an announcement on when that update will be, just that it will be in the future. But this camera is interesting because it's a small and light body. I put some notes right here. It uses the same battery as the Sony A7S III, FX3, which means the battery life is pretty decent on that camera. However, there is a big question mark with this camera that some YouTubers have answered, but some YouTubers have also kind of made statements going away from this, and it's the fact that this camera heavily overheats. Now, me personally, I think it's one of the reasons that this camera is marketed towards vloggers, not even specifically content creators, YouTubers. I don't think it's marketed towards everybody. I think it's marketed specifically towards vloggers. Reason being is if you are a content creator or a videographer, basically anybody that uses this camera as your primary camera and you work with video for a living, the ZV-E1 is probably not going to be the right camera for your work because of the fact that it can overheat after a little bit over 30 minutes. And whether you're a videographer, a content creator, like think about Think Media, they use a lot of the A7S IIIs around all of their production. I think they use some Canon cameras here or there, but for the most part, they use the A7S III. And if you're live streaming as much as they are, sometimes their streams go for over an hour. Sometimes their recorded videos that they do, I'm sure they take longer than 30 minutes to make. And so for a content creator like them, as their main camera, the ZV-E1 doesn't really make that much sense. Now, where the flip side of this is, if you're a vlogger and you go out and you're vlogging or you're shooting in your home studio, but your videos aren't that long, you're doing talking head segments, but you're not talking forever, there's a segment of content creators who don't need unlimited recording time, who then could benefit from the image quality that the ZV-E1 provides and have a huge savings cost-wise on that camera. If you're in that situation, I think it makes a lot of sense to get the ZV-E1. But that's why I want to jump into some of these YouTubers calling the ZV-E1 the A7S III killer. And I don't think that's the case. I actually think that's a little bit misleading. I'm going to specifically call out Peter Lindgren. He's come out with videos calling it the A7S III killer, and that's really only the case if you don't need it for its full potential. So it's been interesting to see some of this misleading clickbait titles going on YouTube that I think goes a step beyond clickbait, because you're almost lying to your audience by saying stuff like that. Because unless you stick within, you only need you don't need long recording times. You just need to record bits here and there. Overheating isn't an issue for you at that point. Okay, makes a lot more sense. So that's my rant on the ZV-E1 YouTubers. But it'll be interesting to see how this camera ends up being received once people get it in hand, because it's got a micro HDMI, which again, for a lot of content creators isn't really a big deal. But if you're a video content creator that needs full HDMI, that makes a difference. I'm using the Canon R7 right now, and the issue I have with the Canon R7 is the micro HDMI becomes an issue. Now, for today's video, I'm actually using the USB-C streaming, and this is the first time I've actually used it from the Canon R7, and we'll talk about this a little bit when I get to the R50. But I actually do really like this whole USB-C thing now that Canon has finally enabled it from the R7, because that's something I've been waiting since launch. And the update only came out recently to be able to use this camera out of its USB-C. And again, an issue for me because it's micro HDMI. Most of my cords are full size, so I just had to get other cords, and it became an issue there. Also, for those of you who don't know, you don't get audio out of the USB-C in the Canon cameras, which that was kind of a whole mind-blowing thing. I don't get why, but we'll get into that when it comes. So the last bit I want to talk about the ZV-E1 is the ZV-E1 versus the Canon R8, because they're very similar cameras at different price points, but I think may have similar issues. But again, there's differences to the cameras too. So got my notes right here, so if you see me looking off to the side, just know I'm looking at them just so I stay on point. So the ZV-E1, Canon R8, both are full-frame cameras. Both of those cameras shoot up to 4K 60 in 10-bit. But that's where things start to divide. So the R8 on the 4K 60 mode and the 4K 24p mode, basically in its 4K modes, you are getting a downscaled from 6K image, where on the A7S III ZV-E1 sensor, it is slightly above 4K, but it's not that much above 4K, so you are going to get sharper images on the Canon R8, because that is basically the same sensor, or it is the same sensor as the Canon R6 Mark II. So if you need sharper images, well, that's where the R8 is going to really come in handy. The R8 also does not have IBIS, internal image stabilization, where the ZV-E1 does. So that's going to be a big deal for some people, where they may want to go vlogging with it. A vlogging camera, IBIS helps. So the R8 will not have that. So that's going to be a big deal, especially a big difference. The ZV-E1 has the same battery as the higher-end Sony mirrorless cameras, where the R8 actually uses the same battery as the EOS RP, and I believe the R50 as well. And that battery is not the greatest, doesn't last that long, but I think a lot of people are going to be buying the R8 as a studio camera, so that may not be a big deal to some, but it is worth noting that that difference is there. Then there's also a really big question mark on the R8, and it comes to overheating. A lot of people haven't had their hands on the R8. There was like that release that a lot of creators were flying out somewhere and they got to mess with it for a day and made their videos, but not as many people have had their hands on the R8 like with the ZV-E1, where a lot of creators were not only sent the ZV-E1, but there was that Sony Creators Camera Camp that I don't know if it's still going on, but it's been going on the past few days, and creators were able to get hands-on of the ZV-E1 for longer than just, a day. So overheating may be a big issue with that camera, and so that's where these two cameras may have some stuff in common right there, which will be interesting to see. I don't know yet. I do plan on testing the R8, and I know Josh Satin plans on getting the R8 in. He put his pre-order in, so I'm sure he'll have a lot of videos on that camera, but the overheating is going to be a huge issue, or a huge question mark and potential issue of the R8. And then let's finally dumb down to image quality. So although the R8 is going to have a downscaled from 6K image, you have C-Log 3 on the R8, where you have S-Log 3 on the ZV-E1, which means you are going to have more dynamic range on the ZV-E1 from Sony than you will on the R8. So it's kind of funny, overall better dynamic range on the ZV-E1, sharper images on the R8, no IBIS on the R8, IBIS on the ZV-E1. There's a lot of toss-ups here, but then the main difference is going to be the price, where the R8 is $1,500 and the ZV-E1 is $2,200. So they are not in the same price category anymore. They just are kind of going after a similar market, but again, not entirely. So it'll be interesting to see how things unfold, but I think we're not going to get all of the answers until we start seeing creators have the R8 in their hands, and we can kind of see where it falls in this whole scale, see how it works, see who it is really for. I'm interested in getting it specifically as a studio camera. Right now, I've actually been using my R7 as a studio camera. I was planning on doing the R50, but I think that's actually a great segue to talk about the R50. Now, I'm going to dive in a little bit today, so if you guys have any questions live, definitely ask. But I'm going to get into the rest of it when I do my full review, because the R50 was a camera that I was really looking forward to. But I think as somebody who basically at this point in time, I've been a DP for years, but now I'm doing more videography work. And as someone who's basically a videographer now, the R50 just plainly did not completely work into my workflow. I just got a text from Scott. I'm guessing you haven't figured out a way to do the 44.1. So if you guys were here last week, I had an issue on StreamYard where I could not get my audio to work, which stunk. So if you guys actually are having issues hearing me, please let me know in the chat, because that was a whole problem I had last week, was where my audio was just coming out terrible. And I've been working with StreamYard to fix it, but unfortunately, I think it's a gear compatibility issue, and I may end up having to actually move off of StreamYard for the live streaming stuff that I do, not just here, but really for my main streaming gig, which is at Jazz's Magazine. Whole other thing. But let's get into the R50. So I was planning on using the R50 as like my studio camera, using it as maybe a secondary camera, a vacation camera. There were a lot of things I liked about the R50. You know, it's, number one, the cheapest 10-bit option for content creators. It's, you know, it's not marketed as a 10-bit camera, but if you shoot an HDR-PQ, you get a really great image, and it is 10-bit, so you can color grade it. And I really did enjoy the image I got out of it, especially shooting anamorphic was pretty fun. But after a week of use, I ran into two main issues that I think a lot of people are going to have with the R50. And I think I may have said the R8. There's so many Rs, it's confusing. But I ran into two issues with the R50 after a week. The biggest issue, which is kind of the theme of these cheaper, newer, good quality cameras, is overheating. I had the R50 overheat when I was doing a live stream for Jazz's, and it overheated around an hour. Now, you know, I didn't know that this was going to be a thing. I was looking at a lot of reviews, and no one was really mentioning crazy overheating. I saw it in some. However, the overheating is a massive bummer for me. So that's going to be the biggest thing that prevented me from using it long term. The next is going to be how small this camera is, which is a great thing. It's great how small this camera is. However, the issue with it being so small is, in order to keep the camera small, you're basically stuck doing one of three options. And it's actually, let me rephrase this. In order to use the camera, you're stuck with three options. If you want to keep it small, you're either forced to use the kit lenses that are made for the RFS line, and there's only a few of them, and the quality is okay in those lenses. Not great, but not bad either. The second option is that you use RF lenses that are made for full-frame cameras but are relatively small. So essentially, you can use something like the 16mm RF, the 50mm RF. Those are the two smallest RF lenses there are available right now from Canon. There's obviously like the 35mm, the 24mm. Those are all great lenses, but a little bit bigger. So the other way would be stuck using full-frame RF lenses, and if you're fine with the size of those, they're not massive, they're just not as small as crop-censored lenses could be. So there's that. Then the third option, which is not my favorite option, but I do this on the Komodo a lot for different reasons, is adapting EF lenses to the R50. Now, the reason I'm kind of meddling on this, and I'm saying I don't like this option for the R50, the R50 is such a small camera that even when you adapt the smallest EF lens to it, it still makes it, a normal size camera or a bigger camera than it is. And it kind of defeats the purpose of having such a small camera in your hand or using in the field, or just in general, defeats the purpose of how small the R50 is. So you have the fact that the only way to get really good glass at this point and do it affordably without having to go the RF route is to get EF glass. There's no third-party options. Canon isn't rushing out to make, EFS lenses that are prime lenses, kind of like Sony has. I have my 11mm 1.8 on Sony. There is no equivalent on Canon right now. And it's been beaten to death, the whole third-party thing, so I'm not going to go too far into it other than the fact that that's a huge downside to the R50. So it kind of irked me, and I'll get into the rest of my whole experience using the R50 in my review of the camera. I hope to have it out next week, but that's kind of where I've been stuck with it. I was really looking forward to using it, but it just has some downsides where, at that point, with all those downsides, I'd rather just use my R7 with C-Log 3. You get a little bit better image quality. I can match it to other Canon cameras that shoot in C-Log 3 a lot easier. It has much better battery life with the LPE6NH batteries. It's just got a lot more going for it to where, I have the R7. I basically rather use it at this point. I'm using it with my TOKINA 11-16 and my EF VND, and because the R7's a decent amount bigger than the R50, it doesn't kind of look it doesn't look overwhelming. It doesn't look huge. It looks about normal of a DSLR. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm at. And that's what I wanted to discuss today. So if you guys have any questions, I'm going to go over to the comments right now, see what you're doing. Hero, you're in Florida. I'm in West Palm Beach. Oh, nice, dude. I am in Fort Lauderdale. I'm actually in downtown. So it's been fun here. So if you're ever in the area, hit me up. Meet up. And you're getting an R8 to go with your R7. I'll pretty much be set for life. Yeah, so I'm kind of in the same boat as you. Because I have the R7 and it has IBIS and it shoots C-Log 3. But I can use it with a lot of my crop censored lenses that I use on the Komodo. I'm thinking about getting the R8, like I said, just to use in the studio. If it's going to live on a tripod and it's going to be like, a tripod camera, it not having IBIS isn't a big deal. If it's going to be a tripod camera, it not having battery life or great battery life isn't a big deal because I'll just power it via USB-C. I think it's potentially a very solid camera, but I need to see how the overheating, what is the deal with the overheating with the R8? Because I have a sneaky suspicion that we are going to have massive overheating on the R8, just like we're getting with the ZV-E1. I mean, you're offering 10-bit up to 4K 60 downscaled in this super small body. If we're getting that kind of overheating on a crop-censored R50, granted at an hour, but that is still overheating, I don't really see how we're not going to get overheating in the R8, and it's why I'm interested to see Josh Sattin's review, because I know he has it coming in, and I'm going to kind of wait to buy it until I see what he does, because if off the bat the overheating is worse than I think it's going to be, then I'm probably not going to pick it up to review. But if it's not too bad, I'll probably pick it up to have just so I can leave it here and not really have to worry about kind of assembling, disassembling a camera. Just like when Scott was asking me about the whole StreamYard thing, it was such a pain to have to disassemble my entire streaming kit. I was using the R50, the R7, and my FX30 on an A10 Mini, and I was putting my audio into my A10 Mini Pro, and the audio I was putting my audio into a Rodecaster Pro, and then I was taking the audio from the Rodecaster Pro and putting it into the A10 Mini Pro, and then everything was just going out of my A10 Mini through USB into my computer. That was a whole ordeal. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens. I'll keep you guys updated on what I end up doing from StreamYard. Considering trading both the A7 III with my Tamron G2 28-75, Sony A6400 with a 35mm for an R8 or Panasonic S5 II. Thoughts? So, I do have thoughts. However, as I've been talking about with this R8, I would kind of wait to get an R8 and see how it performs before you rush out and buy one as your main camera. It's kind of the same situation as the ZV-E1. I think if it has as bad overheating as I think it's going to, if you're a content creator that doesn't need to record for an extended period of time, you're just getting clips here, you're just getting clips there, whatever, then you can use that as your main camera. But if you need extended recording time, and that's my fear, if I'm going to use it as my main camera, sometimes I may record for 40 minutes and I may chop down the video into like a 5-10 minute video because I may have like just left the camera recording while I went to go grab something or whatever. Or I just, decided to rephrase what I was saying in a different way because although I loosely script my videos, like even today, I have all these notes so I could make sure that I was talking about the exact bullet points I wanted to. Sometimes when I'm not live like I am today, I just want to rephrase them. I want to redo it, and that's the beauty of recording. You can do that. And so if the overheating is bad, that's going to be an issue for me. Now, the Panasonic S5 II, that's a whole other animal. And here's my thought. I did use the Panasonic S5 II. I probably should share the video. I worked on a video with Anthony Rodriguez, and he has the S5 II. And we actually compared the S5 II against the Sony FX30. I really do like the S5 II. I think it's a solid camera. However, my thoughts after using it, and this is more for the video professional, I don't think it's good as your only camera if you rely on autofocus. If you don't rely on autofocus and you're doing mostly manual focus or you're going to mess with autofocus every once in a while, I think it's a solid camera. The anamorphic support on that camera is fantastic. The image quality on that camera is fantastic. But if you rely on autofocus, if you do weddings, events, any type of videography type work, that autofocus just not only makes your life easier, but makes videoing, filmmaking, capturing this entire process, just making the capturing quicker. If you rely on autofocus, I don't think the S5 II is there yet. I don't know if it will ever be there. I hope it could be via firmware updates because I've seen magic happen. Especially they fixed the autofocus issues, for instance, on the original R6, like a year after it came out. There were some autofocus issues. They fixed it. It was cool. If they can do that, awesome. If they can't, the way I see it going down is whatever the next camera Panasonic comes out with will probably be heavily improved in the autofocus department. So yeah, I mean, I think that's really my thoughts on that. It's hard for me to recommend the S5 II for specific creators as their main camera. And I guess that's where I'm getting at with all cameras. Every camera has a market that it's really, really good for. And then they also have markets that can be used in them, but it may not be as strong. Like, for instance, and this is probably going to be a little controversial, my Komodo. This past year, I have used my Komodo the least since I have purchased it. And the reason being is, as I said before, I used to do a lot of DP work. I was doing documentaries, short films. I did a few pilots. I did work on some features, indie features, and all of those utilized the Komodo. Oh, and I did a reality show on the Komodo. And the first year I had it, I used the Komodo a lot. Second year started to die down. Third year, which is basically part of 2022 and part of this year, 2023. To give you an example, in 2023, I've used the Komodo twice for professional production. I've used it on one feature and one scripted pilot, and that's it. That's all I've used it for. Everything else I've done this year and the end of last year, I used mirrorless cameras just because that's the kind of work I'm doing. And so the Komodo does not fit my mirrorless videography workflow. And that's where some of these cameras are coming into play now, where now we have all these different mirrorless options, and some of them work better for certain types of videography or just certain types of video in general than other ones do. So that's why I like that we're in this age of there's so many different content creators out right now. I mean, everyone and their mother has a YouTube channel. But everyone has a different perspective, and they also have a different work. I mean, we give a lot of content creators, we give them a lot of crap. We give them a hard time because a lot of content creators do content creation as pretty much their only video hustle. But then there are a lot of content creators like me who work in the video field, whether it's filmmaking, narrative, videography, weddings, whatever. And they do a YouTube video as their side hustle, and you get their perspective. And depending on what kind of video you're interested in doing, it's interesting to hear everyone's perspective. It's even interesting to hear all of these content creators who only do those video channels. It's interesting to hear their perspective because their perspective helps you for when you're trying to do a YouTube channel or you're trying to do any content that involves the same kind of workload. And so that's why I do watch people like Caleb Pike, for instance. He was a videographer many years ago, but for many, many years now, all he does is content creation. All he does is his YouTube channel. He doesn't do client work. He hasn't done client work in many years, but he did do client work. But all of his videos I watch as the lens of a content creator, because there's certain videos he's pushed products that would not work the way he's talking about them in real life, in like a run and gun, shooting a wedding, shooting corporate, whatever. It just wouldn't work in those situations. But shooting in your home studio, 100%. So we're in such a time right now of so many people with so many perspectives. That's why I like, when I see these videos come out and it's like 20 different videos from 20 different creators of the same camera, I'll pick and choose whose perspective I want to see so I can kind of get the various perspectives of all the different content creators to kind of get the full picture of where this camera is going to work for what I want for it to work in, and where it's probably not going to work for where it may not work in. No problem at all. So that being said, we're rushing up on 28, 29 minutes. If you guys have any questions, feel free to put them in the comments while you're here live. I will get to them. I was originally planning on doing this at 4, and then it got moved to 5, and then my buddy had to cancel. So I'm sorry I did this a little earlier than planned. We're doing a one-wheel ride tonight through the city of Fort Lauderdale, downtown Fort Lauderdale, and I got to start packing for that at 5. So I figured I'd come on early and kind of see what you all are up to, talk about the stuff for the podcast today. And if you have any questions, if you're watching this podcast after it's come out or you're listening to the audio version, make sure to let me know in the comments things you want me to talk about in next week's episode. I'm going to try and do a live stream podcast every Friday. I want to try and do them around 4 or 5 o'clock. It really just depends on what I have going on that week. So definitely stay tuned if this is your first time here. I originally planned on doing it. I did one last week, and like I said, I had the StreamYard issues. So hopefully that's sorted at least for now until I figure out where I'm going to move to. So that being said, I don't really see anything else in the comments, so I think I'm going to end it here. So I do want to thank all of you for joining me today. Like I said, if you have any questions after this has gone on, put them in the description below. If you have any ideas for future videos you want to see, I do have the R50 review coming out next week. I have a review on this really cool backpack that I've received that's essentially a budget version of the Peter McKinnon nomadic bag. And let me grab some of this Red Bull. If that's going to be coming out soon as well. If you've heard of TOKINA filters, I did a review on their latest filter this week, their latest VND, and I've been using their VNDs for a long time, and they've always been okay, but this latest one they came out with really surprised me because there was no color shift in it, and for what I needed it for, basically using it with all of my smaller crop sensor Sony lenses, it's been really fantastic. So that video's up on the channel. It came out yesterday, so make sure to take a look at that. And yeah, thank you for watching, everybody. Till next time, my name's Jeff Fagan. I will see y'all in the next video.